Joined now at the library by John Rosenthal, longtime gun sanity advocate and the founder of Stop Handgun Violence. John, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me back.
So, John, thank you for being with us very much. So, we have some bad news involving the Supreme Court and some good news. The first is the bad news where the Supreme Court struck down the ban on bump stocks, and people may remember that ban came into being after a massacre in Las Vegas where 60 people were killed and hundreds more were injured by a shooter that was using a bump stock. So, what do you make of this one?
It's absurd. The bump stock turns a semi-automatic weapon into as close to a machine gun or automatic weapon as you can have. 60 people dead, 500 people shot, 800 to 1,000 people sent to the hospital, and Congress didn't even notice. So the fact that the majority on the court didn't care. You got to remember that in 2008, Justice Scalia wrote for the 5-4 majority on the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of the free state, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And he said that protects weapons that were made and used at the time of the founders. And he particularly said, I don't mean assault weapons. They didn't exist. They're not protected. And he also said, like all rights, they're not unlimited, and you can put reasonable restrictions on how guns are sold. That's what we do here in Massachusetts. We have the lowest gun death rate in the nation as a result of it. And if every state had the same low gun death rate, the same gun laws, we simply regulate guns like automobiles, inherently dangerous products. We've reduced the rate of gun deaths by 40% since 1994. If every state had what we had, half of the 48,000 gun deaths a year would be prevented without banning anything except for assault weapons and bump stocks. So the fact that the majority on the Supreme Court didn't care enough is absurd, but it's consistent. Remember, this is the same Supreme Court that attacked women's right to sort of choose how they treat their bodies. This is the same court that hasn't ruled on immunity. Remember, Trump's argument on immunity, his lawyers stated that it is within his rights to kill his political opponents. And they still are considering this. So what we all have to understand is all the things we care about, not the least of which is our children, and the fact that every 30 minutes a kid is shot. Every 3 hours a kid dies. Today, another 120 will die of Americans because we don't regulate real guns like we regulate toy guns and teddy bears. If Trump comes back, he's got the courts. Gun violence is going to get worse. Freedom and democracy is going to be diminished. And, we've got to make our children and their future a priority. And everything is on the line with guns, with reproductive rights, with the environment, with freedom and democracy in November.
We will in a second talk about the good news, which, in my opinion, shouldn't be cause for such celebration other than the fact that this court is so horrible that people celebrated this domestic violence restriction. A guy who has a restraining order for domestic violence can constitutionally be denied a weapon. Seizing on what you were talking about, John Rosenthal, Marjorie and I probably talk more about the importance of Supreme Court nominations than any radio show in America. I am pretty convinced that nobody gives a damn. They care about individual issues. They don't think that the next guy, whoever it is going to pick maybe 1, 2, we don't know, and they might be 40 years old and serve for 40 years. And I'm not sure, and I hope you'll disabuse me, that people who want sane restraint on gun ownership care as much about it as those who want unfettered right to own, Second Amendment absolutists. Am I right or am I not right?
Under 40 voters will be roughly 45% of the electorate in November. They care. These are kids that have never known a day in their lives where they couldn't be shot in school. And all the recent polling shows they care deeply about gun violence prevention, they care deeply about freedom and reproductive rights, they care deeply about the climate. So if they show up, we can stop Trump and the Supreme Court justices that he will appoint if he comes back. I mean, Jim, Marjorie, in our lifetime, the court's gone for the most part.
Yeah.
But not our kids' lifetime. But if Trump comes back, and they care deeply about the court, they
get it much better than we do. I agree.
And so it's about us supporting them and their future. If they come out in record numbers like they did in 18, 20, and 22, we save freedom and democracy. They get a future that they can help control. And in 28 and beyond, they'll be the folks that we're going to be electing.
You know, John Rosenthal, before we get back to, again, this Rahimi case in a second, I want to stay on electoral politics and guns. For David Hogg, a Parkland survivor and incredible activist, 4 years at Harvard, you and he were like practically locked at the hip for the time he was
Still
here.
are.
He's now doing some electoral stuff with those young voters you're talking about. You're smiling. What's the feedback on how that's gone?
He's pretty much batting close to 1,000. They've been basically, he started Leaders We Deserve. He is supporting, it's a super PAC supporting Gen Z candidates, and they've been winning. So they're our future. And that has sort of definitely, helped David deal with the trauma of being, a survivor at Parkland. And to begin to sort of have control over his future and the future of America, which, our generation, has sadly, allowed, this environment to take place where they've never been safe.
We'll get back to this case that the Supreme Court did at least uphold this law. I wasn't sure they would, but barring this domestic abusers from owning guns, and it was based on a particularly bad case of this guy that was going after this one woman, going after another woman, shooting up people all over the place. So should we be encouraged at all by the Rahimi decision?
Sure. I mean, clearly it could have been worse. It was an 8-1 decision. I mean,
Clarence Thomas being the one, need I say, but go ahead.
Clarence Thomas. I mean, each of the, the majority on the court have shown that, they actually have, they've become activists. They care more about sort of their patrons who fly them around in jets and fly flags upside down. I mean, you can't make this stuff up in America. We've got to stop this nonsense, and we have the power to do it in November. So the Rahimi case is a Texas court, said that this guy couldn't have a weapon. And the Supreme Court, thankfully upheld that. And I mean, there were 5 instances with this guy and guns, shooting it, threatening women. He's a known domestic abuser. So it was a pretty, I think, certain case. Although with this Supreme Court, you can't count on anything.
The thing that I hate to, I'm optimistic about almost nothing these days, but the optimism, there was a piece we read in the New York Times, I think by David French, I'm not sure who wrote it, that Roberts, who we wish was taking on the ethical failures of some of his colleagues and refuses to do so, seemed to take on a decision that he signed on to a couple of years ago, this Brune decision, which Thomas wrote, and correct me if I'm wrong with any of this here, where Thomas basically said in 2022, as the writer of the opinion, that for any restriction on gun ownership to be constitutionally permissible, there has to be an historic, I don't know what the next word is, parallel, something precedent for this with our founders for 200 years ago, which to me is so ridiculous, it's unbelievable. It seems to me in this Rahimi decision, the domestic violence case, that the court under Roberts, again, without getting lost in the weeds, I hope, was saying he's saying you misunderstood what we said. I think what he's saying is we went too far, and we want to clarify that we did go too far here. And I think the words of Coney Barrett were, okay, let's find like an historical analog maybe, but we don't have to be literalists in some fashion. Meaning to me, it opened the door to maybe approval of red flag laws, which should come before them. Do you agree with that, or do you not?
Oh, I definitely think so. And I mean, look, Justice Scalia was no liberal.
Of course
and
not.
He said as much, that you can't ban guns at the common use of the time of the founding, but you can put reasonable restrictions on how guns are sold, and semi-automatics, assault weapons, none of that existed, and they're not protected. So far, in Massachusetts, we are ground zero. We have enacted the most effective gun laws in the nation. We have the lowest gun death rate in the nation. And if replicable, we're going to save half of the 48,000 gun deaths a year. How is that going to happen? There are 5 seats in the House that need to flip, hold the Senate, and stop Trump and this white nationalist MAGA movement, and we'll get uniform gun laws without banning all guns that will dramatically save lives.
I saw where Congressman, the former Congresswoman from Arizona, Gabrielle Giffords, people may remember she was shot in the head back in 2011 and survived.
Do you know where she was staying when she was here?
No.
Lenox Hotel.
Oh, really?
Peter, our buddy, the door guy.
Oh, my goodness.
I walked out to get my car the other day, and he was hugging her, and it was such a beautiful scene, actually. And she is, remember we met them?
In a restaurant.
Her and her husband
yes,
in New Hampshire during primary 5 years ago.
An incredibly inspirational
But
woman.
go ahead,
But she was here, pushing for gun reform. How is she, what has been her role? I mean, she seems to be like she's all over the place, despite having been shot in the head.
One of the most courageous and strong women I've ever met. I actually helped her throw the pitch last Sunday.
You did?
Yes. At,
my goodness.
At Fenway
Park. Yeah, she's a dear friend, and it's unbelievable. I mean, she has no use of her right arm. I mean, she'll never be the same as before the shooting, but she is so deeply committed to gun violence prevention, and she's a hero. And like, even when we brought her up to the State House, Ron Mariano, the Speaker of the House, President Spilka, the Senate, they were almost like tongue-tied. They were so impressed by her strength, her courage, and they basically said, you can count on us in Massachusetts to continue being the leader, and we are going to pass this next gun bill in this session, and thanked her. And now these are folks that, can help continue our incredibly effective gun laws in Massachusetts and fill dangerous loopholes like the ghost gun loophole that we need to close here in
Explain
Massachusetts.
what a ghost gun is, by the way, because I know they're acting on, hopefully acting on it now. Explain what the ghost gun
is a kit that you can buy in the mail and ship the parts to your home. No serial number, not traceable, and it's a very effective handgun like any other.
You can print the parts on 3D printers of your house, can't you?
You can. You can.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things I think I remember about Congresswoman Giffords when she was shot is that other bystanders were able to tackle the shooter when he stopped to reload the magazine. It only took him a couple of seconds, but that was enough for them to tackle him, which argues further for how we shouldn't have these high-capacity magazines.
So assault weapons, high-capacity magazines are designed for 2 purposes. Outgun police who only carry 17 rounds, and Congress has said you can have 30 or 100-round magazines.
Yeah.
Law enforcement carries service weapons, handguns. Congress has said have AR-15s, have AK-47s, and kill as many people as you want without having to reload. Well, police die when they're having to reload their 17 rounds. You just can't underestimate how polarized this issue is and how simple it would be to solve. We are the only country in the world that doesn't regulate military weapons and easily concealed handguns. We have more gun deaths in America just since 1975 than all U.S. servicemen and women killed in all foreign wars combined.
Wow.
And there's no background check. A toy gun can't be sold unless it has a little red dot at the end of the barrel. The AK-47, AR-15, made here in Massachusetts, right by Smith & Wesson, used at Parkland, used in Las Vegas. No regulations on how they are marketed. And, since 1994, when we put up the billboard on the Mass Pike, about 1 million dead from largely preventable gun violence. You saw yesterday that a report came out by the Surgeon General. The number one cause of death for children and adolescents in America are unregulated firearms. There's no species on the planet that knowingly allows its young to die without doing something about it. Americans are unique on the planet. It's our future that we are killing in order to placate the unregulated gun industry. And we were talking about Cerberus. Cerberus,
Stewart Health, yep.
Cerberus means it's a private equity firm started by a guy named Steven Feinberg, who went to Princeton, lived in New York, funds Trump. Cerberus means the three-headed dog guarding the gates of hell. And they own 20...
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
And they own 20% of the gun industry, including Bushmaster, the weapon used to kill 26-year-olds in Newtown, Connecticut. And that weapon, by the way, it's an AR-15, uses a .223 round. The parents of those 6 and 7-year-olds that I know had to identify their children by their clothing after getting 3 to 11 rounds with a military weapon. And Congress doesn't care. And nor does Trump. He takes credit for stopping all gun safety bills. It is on us to save our kids. And in November, every issue, including this one, can be, moved forward in a sustainable, safe way without banning all guns and start saving our children versus just, concerned about our taxes.
John, just a second on the Surgeon General. In that multiple-page production of his, he said we should declare gun violence a public health emergency. The consequence, I think it's really important for anybody in positional leadership to say whatever they can, but the reality is Congress has got to act to effectuate any of that, right? So it's a statement in search of principled people who actually care about other people.
We are 5 seats away from the MAGA white nationalist movement not controlling Congress. So our greatest opportunity to save our kids and the 120 more Americans that will die tomorrow from gun violence, today, tomorrow, and every day, is to change Congress in November.
But that's, just to be clear, to be my usual negative self, obviously the primary obstacle are the Republicans and Trump, but not all Democrats are on board in Congress in terms of sane gun reform, correct?
Not all, but enough to get a universal background check. Like you need a background check to drive a school bus, but not to buy 1,000 AR-15s in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and 32 states. You need, we're a country of people and laws. And the least we can do is at least have a background check to know whether somebody's a felon or not, to not have military-style weapons on the streets, and to replicate, the laws that have been proven, like our car laws, to dramatically reduce injury and death from that inherently dangerous product, to do the same thing with easily concealed handguns and military weapons. It can be done very quickly and I think there's enough votes in Congress to do it.
Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but before you go, I was just thinking about this. We talked about this last week when Ticketmaster is doing this nationwide tour, and one of the people it features, besides Tucker Carlson, who I think is a unscrupulous, untruthful journalist, or entertainer, if you want to call him that, is Alex Jones, the guy from InfoWars who claimed that the kids in Sandy Hook were crisis actors, and this didn't really happen. The family sued happily and won. But what does that say, I guess, that Ticketmaster would think that was okay? Alex Jones? I mean, never mind Tucker Carlson, but Alex Jones?
I don't know the situation with regard to Ticketmaster and
Yeah.
Alex Jones, but I do know the families sued and won $50 million. They're liquidating his estate.
Well, they won more than $1 billion, didn't they, ultimately? Isn't the ultimate verdict there? I'm pretty...
The Alex Jones, I'm not sure.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm not sure, but I can tell you that Sandy Hook happened. I know the parents, and I would say, if anyone is interested, we're a blue state, obviously. What we do in November is pretty much predetermined, but so is the fact that 95% of Americans know how they're going to vote.
Yeah.
The movable voters are roughly 9 million. They're in 6 to 8 swing states, and the largest segment of the electorate that could swing this election are young people. So we haven't talked about this before, but I hired this branding expert by the name of Bruce Mao to come up with a slogan that didn't need to be explained in 22.
Oh.
Like Uncle Sam needs you to vote. It's morning in America. Stop the steal.
So what is it?
America is calling, vote. And if you go to americascalling.org, you can see. And so we raised about $2 million in 22. We put digital ads on kids' phones in swing states. They opened them 14 million times. They watched them 95% through, and 15+% increase in intent to vote among Gen Z candidates.
What's the website again?
americaiscalling.org.
Americaiscalling.org. John, thanks for your work for decades and what you're doing now. You're great. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me back.
Thanks so
Thank you
much.
very, very much for being with us, John.
Thank you.
We have been speaking with John Rosenthal, a longtime gun control advocate and founder of Stop Handgun Violence. John, thanks again for all your knowledge and for taking the time.